Right, hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I've gone and done it. I've bought myself another Olympus Pen-F. However, there's something a little bit different with this Olympus Pen-F. For one, it only shoots film. This is the original first Olympus Pen-F, fully mechanic, so not even a light meter. All you can control on it is your shutter speed and your aperture here, and then obviously you can wind on your film here. So this one was brought out around 1963 to about 1966. One thing to note with this particular single lens reflex camera is that it actually shoots half frames. So for every 35mm negative, it squeezes on 2 frames. So for a traditional, like this film here, which has traditionally 36 exposures, this one will allow you to shoot 72. So obviously then the quality is not going to be as good as the full 35mm full frame negative. But saying that, it does only still have a crop of about 1.4, which is equivalent to obviously modern standards of an APS-C size sensor. So it's still possible to get some really good images out of this particular camera, as hopefully I will demonstrate. So I obviously as well, I didn't start out looking for the Pen-F straight out of the bat. I did start looking originally at the more kind of automatic point and shoot half frame cameras. So obviously not as new as the Olympus AF-1 Mini here, but Olympus did do a kind of a more point and shoot series of half frame cameras called the EE version, which stood for electronic eye, because they had like a selenium cell around the lens of the camera which allowed it to meter for a scene correctly. And I did look at those cameras, and obviously some other brands are out there as well, like the Canon Demi or the Konica I. But as has happened with a lot of point and shoot cameras these days, like the MJU series or the Contax series, they've almost reached this kind of cult status and have become highly collectible. And it's even harder as well to try and find one in a reasonable working condition, because these cameras are quite old now. And yeah, what with the cult status and the chance of them not working, it kind of almost pushed the prices up into the realms where the Pen-F started to look a little bit like a potential alternative, especially because the Pen-F series of camera, being a single lens reflex camera and interchangeable lenses that you can use. So obviously this has got the 38mm f1.8 lens in the moment, which came in the camera, but you can just flick it off like so. And then I bought this 100mm f3.5 lens at the same time, and then that just goes on like so. The ability to change lenses, the large aperture f1.8 on here, and then the full mechanical control over your shutter and your shutter speed just allow you to be a lot more creative with your shots, I find. And when I was flicking through kind of Instagram and Flickr, I was always drawn to the images made by the Pen-F series of cameras rather than the other half frame type cameras. I just found generally that the image quality was superior from the Pen-F series of film cameras. So I took the punt, and actually I did see a really good deal from a camera shop in Wales called Cambrian Photo Company, and they were literally selling the body, the Olympus Pen-F. So this is the original one with the Gothic F here, with the actual lens as well, the 38mm lens, for about £220, which might sound a lot, but I was looking at spending about 80-90 quid on one of the more point and shoot half frame cameras, where you're restricted in terms of focus, they were either fixed focus or they had like a Holger style zone focusing system, so quite a basic zone focus system where you could select like portrait, group of people, landscape, and so on. Whereas obviously with these kind of cameras, you've got manual focus. So with the Great Viewfinder, you can actually focus in on where you want your focus to be and then control your depth of field of your shot in order to achieve your idea and composition for a particular scene. So yeah, so I really didn't think that then spending £220 on a body and a lens was that bad of a deal, really. And this Pen-F that I've got here, as you can see here, seems to be in absolutely immaculate condition. There's only really a couple of dinks. Some of the leather is a little bit dirty in places, but from my use so far, it seems to be in perfect working order. And I've actually got some film in here now, hence why I'm not opening it up and showing you inside, because it's got a particularly interesting shutter, which I'll talk about in a future video, which is one of the aspects of this series which make it quite special to use. It's not silent, so it's definitely not one to use for stealth street photography, but nevertheless it's still quite small, as you can see in my hand here. Obviously the Pen-F series has got 3 variants in the series. So you've got the original F version here, which, like I said, it's only got shutter speed, aperture control on the lens, obviously manual focus of the lens itself. You've got a depth of field preview button here. You've got underneath, you've got like a tripod mount, and you've got a place to rewind the film when you've finished with the film itself. Obviously the counter on the top, the dial here to wind the film on, so 2 strokes. And if any of the footage is usable from my previous attempts where I've messed up and did it in autofocus, in single autofocus mode, then I'll put it up now just to demonstrate those aspects, but I apologise, they are a little bit out of focus, so the footage quality is not the best. And then this thing here as well on the top here flips up to allow you to wind the film back on when you finish with the roll, or to kind of add tension to the film itself. And then you've got a button here as well which allows you to take the lens off. And as well as the aperture markings, you've obviously got a distance scale, so you can choose how far away you want to focus, and then also a scale to help tell you what the hyperfocal distance is. So when you set an aperture, generally you're supposed to be able to work out how much of your scene will be in focus. So yeah, so back to the variants. So this is the original first Pen-F. Then the second Pen-F was called a Pen-F-T, and that introduced a uncoupled light meter into the equation. So when you look through the viewfinder, it would give you the exposure that you would then need to adjust your lens and shutter speed combination. And I was really considering going for the FT version because I have in the past relied on cameras with light meters or an external light meter. So going for a camera that was full mechanical, I wasn't completely sold on. And then the final version in the Pen-F series is the Pen-F-V, and that actually got rid of the light meter, because one of the consequences of adding the light meter to the FT version was that it made the viewfinder a little bit dimmer, so a little bit harder to compose your scenes. So the final version got rid of the meter, and then it had all the other improvements, whereas on the original F you've got to wind this twice for each exposure. On the FT and the FV variants you just have to do one kind of stroke to get on to the next film, and there's a couple other improvements as well. I think as well they introduced a self-timer here, whereas this hasn't got a self-timer, but it has got a socket on the shutter speed release here where you can put a cable release in. So if I ever wanted to put this onto a tripod, I can still use the cable release here to basically fire off the shutter. As one thing to note as well with this Pen-F series is that you're shooting a 4x3 frame in vertical format. So if you want to shoot landscape, you have to rotate the camera like so. And I actually haven't shot anything in landscape yet. I've been just trying to use the vertical format. And what I've tried to do is, when I was looking at images, people tend to use these cameras more to document, tell a story more. So what I've tried to do with my images so far was basically take two images of a similar subject to try and complement each other rather than as a single composition. Some of them probably will work well as single compositions if obviously the film turns out okay, so I haven't tested it yet. But likewise, when I scan them and I decide to keep the images side by side into like a diptych type arrangement, they should hopefully, in theory, work well as a pair as well. Another reason why I didn't go for an FT model as well is because these cameras now, we're talking that they're over 50 years old, so there's no real guarantees anymore that those light meters are going to A, work, or B, be reliable out in the field. And furthermore, the batteries that you need for them, they're obsolete now. There are ways around that, and you can get alternative batteries which can be compatible. I didn't really want to go down that route because, like I said, the other two reasons are that there's no guarantee that the light meter would be still in a reliable state in this day and age. So then I ruled out the FV because they're rare and more expensive. So like I said, a good deal came up with the body and the lens, because I've seen the lenses you go for more than £100. So then to get the body for about 120, when you take off the cost of the lens, it made it a really, really good deal, especially for one which is in this good of condition, it seems. One thing I did buy as well is I did buy a 43mm step-up adapter for these lenses, which both have a 43mm filter ring, so I can experiment with the orange and red filter that I've got for my other film cameras. And that's pretty much why I've gone for a half frame camera, really. I feel that with 72 exposures in a roll, I can really go crazy and try lots of different things. I can try different exposures, different filters on the same scene, and then basically compare them all together to see which one I like to look. And also as well, I can obviously try different things on different subjects and just be experimental, really, and have a fun time doing it. Another reason as well for getting this camera is, like I said earlier, I'm interested in trying to create those diptych, triptych type scenes where you link more than one frame together to tell a story or just portray a subject in a different kind of way. So yeah, so I'm just hoping that it will help me to shoot a little bit more free and easily, especially obviously with medium format film, you're limited to 6 or 16 exposures if you use a half frame 120 film, whereas obviously normally with 35mm film you're restricted to 24 or 36 exposures. So having access to 72 will help me hopefully shoot a lot more scenes and try and inject a little bit more creativity into my photography. So back to the fact that this camera is full manual. I was going to start off just using it straight with my external light meter, my Gossen light meter. But when I loaded the film in, I made the decision to initially just use what they call the Sunny 16 rule, which is basically just when it's sunny outside. Typically it's overcast today, but when it's sunny, you typically, for an ISO 125 film, you would set your lens at f/16, and then you would set your shutter speed to 1/125th of a second to match the 125 ISO. And then what you can do is, if you wanted to go to f11 or f8, you just reduce light by a stop. So if you wanted f11, you would have a shutter speed of 1/250th of a second, or if you wanted an aperture of f8, you would go up to 1/500th of a second, and that of course then is the limit. So you wouldn't be able to get that shallow depth of field in the sun without then using a filter to lower the amount of light entering the lens. But thankfully, like I said, it's overcast now, so you can then use what is almost like an alternative to the sunny 16 rule. So basically, in sunny conditions, use f/16. When it's not quite as bright, a little bit hazy, you can use f11 and then 1/125th of a second shutter speed. Or if it's a bit kind of overcast but still quite bright, you can use f8 all the way down to kind of shooting sunset down at f4, and then 1/125th of a second as your base. And that is actually what I tried to do for the first 48 exposures. I think I did go out today and I did check the exposure with a light meter, and it did correspond pretty much to that sunny f/16 stroke alternative rules that you can use when you're out and about without a light meter. And I've actually found it really quite liberating not to have to use a light meter. So it's just you, the camera, what you sense the light conditions is, and then just dial in the shutter speed and aperture combination to basically achieve the depth of field you want in your composition, if the shutter speed of this camera allows you to do that, because obviously it's limited to 1/500th of a second. So another reason as well for buying the Pen-F is because I'm increasingly finding that, although I do find that these automatic point and shoot film cameras do have a place, especially if you want to shoot film but you might not have the time necessarily to compose a scene using more manual film cameras like the Pen-F here. But I generally do find in my photography at the moment that the time that I spend actually seeing and then capturing an image with my cameras is probably where I get most of my enjoyment. Yes, it's always a bonus to get good photos out of the camera, but it's that time when I'm out enjoying my hobby and slowing down to take the shot, put in the right settings that I need to expose the scene, trying to be creative. That is where I get most of my enjoyment from photography at the moment. So to have a camera like this and liberate myself from external aids like a light meter is just quite good at the moment. I find like it helps slow down that moment for me. So yeah, so I think that wraps up this video. I wasn't intending to shoot B-roll for every kind of exposure that I've taken on this roll of film. It's mainly just been me this time, just getting used to using the camera, going out, using the sunny 16 overcast f8 rule, whatever you want to call it, to basically capture the scenes that I see. And then mainly is where I've tried to, so far in this roll, when I'm up to 48, I've tried to go down that diptych route. So every composition I've done, I've shot 2 images to try and complement each other. So I wasn't going to put any B-roll up into this video of all those compositions. I was just going to, this time around, just put up a selection of my favourites, assuming that I have any to put up after I finish the roll and then developed it in my lab box here. But then what I'll probably plan to do, if the images are any good, is I'll probably plan to do a second video, because for every time I've done an exposure, I've written down notes so that I know what the light was on the day, what aperture I used, what shutter speed I did, what I was trying to achieve, so that I could probably discuss in a further video whether the camera or my metering worked in the way that I expected it to work. Yeah, so I'll put those images up now. So as always, thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments below regarding this Pen-F. And that's one thing I was going to know. I was worried, obviously on the back here, this is the viewfinder here. That was probably my biggest concern in getting this camera, is because obviously I wear glasses. I was worried how easy it would be to use, because this hasn't got any focusing aids either, other than a matte screen. But I actually find the viewfinder to be really quite bright and easy to focus, especially where like now I can quite clearly see the Osmo Pocket and the time that I've taken so far on this particular video. So obviously the proof will be in the pudding, so I'll put up those favourite images now. So thanks for watching, bye for now.